Hi, I'm Nancy Giordano. Welcome again to our continuing series that dives into the key concepts and ideas of leadering and how they differ from leadership. And today we'll talk about wonder versus resist. So this seems a really good day to take a deep breath as we dive in, as we will talk about the exponential shifts that are around us. If the playbook is dead and we have to figure out a new way of thinking about it, this really makes the argument, I think, pretty strongly about the fact that we need to think about things differently. So what if, let's just play a what if game for a moment. What if I could 3D print a house in 24 hours or less than actually, in 12 hours for $7,000? What if my organizational leaders encouraged me to put a chip inside my hand and plant a chip inside my hand in order to make it easier to get through the office and get things done? Or what if I was told that I could shorten the work day or shorten the work week and actually lift productivity, right? Would we be open to those ideas and that way of thinking? Or do we think that is just all crazy? And why would anybody ever do that? Not just science fiction. I'm here to say that actually every one of those things already has been piloted or pioneered and seen actually interesting results. There's a company in Sweden that has encouraged its employees to embed a chip in their hand in order to make it easier to open the door or to get coffees from the coffee machine or whatever it is that somehow makes it easier to get through the day. And over 2,000 people, I think, have done it. They've had chipping parties throughout Sweden now. I think the idea is catching on. And there was a company in Wisconsin who thought that was kind of fascinating and brought it back. So it's now starting in the United States. And we'll see how far it goes, but it certainly raises a whole bunch of questions around ethics, around privacy, and around when such a technology should actually be deployed. Is it something that you do when you're an adult and it's a discretionary thing like putting in contact lenses, or is it something that eventually we would think would be something that we would put in our children when they're born? That's a really big conversation actually around neural implants right now. Is this something that we decide is a part of the process, just like we choose about immunizations when they're born? So these are fascinating questions to be thinking about as we move forward. But this idea again of what if and the space that it creates for wonder is really important. As a strategic futurist, I get to go and hang out with the strategists, the technologists and the designers, the engineers, all these people who are shaping the future. And we ask them how far along we are. Almost universally, they say we're only 1% in, which is a pretty fascinating number when you think about it. And the fact that if we're only 1% in, that means there's a long way to go and a lot we need to learn. There's a statistic now that 90% of the world's information has been created in the last 2 years. Don't know how they do the math on that. But if they're anywhere close to that, again, this idea about being able to be curious and take in new information and not immediately reject it because it's unfamiliar is a critical capacity to be able to move forward. It is not an inefficiency. It is literally fundamental to the work and our ability to be able to create value and navigate our way through successfully. So I have decided, realized that this word wonder means so much to me. I think about it, it's on my necklace. It's on the wall downstairs that I've stenciled for my children. I've got 4 keywords that I want them to be the blueprint for the future. And wonder is right at the very top of that list. If you're curious, it's wonder, thank, do, repeat. But wonder is really at the top. It's about being, activated by our curiosity and by our unique passions as we go through the world. And so this world, this word means a lot, but it's not just, a frothy word. I think it's actually a really strategic word. Mark Twain once encouraged us by saying that you can't trust your judgment if your imagination's out of focus. So really, this is the moment right now where we need to open our imagination. That's why I think it's so great about the word wonder. It's more than curiosity. It's about really sensing the possibilities that are around us. If we could just look at the information for a moment and not immediately, again, reject it. Resisting doesn't mean that we keeps us safe. I would argue wonder can keep us safe. We don't have to necessarily activate it. There's certain technologies I don't have in my home. Even in Alexa, I don't have in my home because I don't think that they're necessarily the right thing for us and our family. So just being curious or in a state of wonder doesn't mean you have to say yes. It just means that you're open to considering it and understanding why or why not it may make sense, or even looking at the edges of things that we should be wondering about that are not necessarily always positive. There's plenty of things that are on the horizon right now that we should be spending time thinking about and wondering a lot more about, including how do we reskill an entire population as new technologies continue to augment and change the way that we work. Whether or not we have more work or less work, big debate. I think we're going to have less, but even if we had more, it's going to be very, very different work. And so, how do we ensure that everyone is part of this conversation, part of the digital economy that is moving forward, and ensure that, again, they feel as though they are prepared for it? It's a really important thing that I do not think that on a societal level that we are wondering nearly enough about. Same thing around AI bias, same thing around deep fake, and the ability to be able to reconstruct almost all technology, documents. whether it's a song or a book or a scientific paper. That's really the key one, right? If we can take something like GPT-3 and we can recreate a science paper that sounds authoritative enough, then the question is of who, trusts the science or turn to the scientists suddenly becomes a really tricky thing to do in the world of conspiracy theory. So I'm just saying that there will be some things that we need to certainly wonder about and create better solutions for than we have done thus far. So wonder again opens up just the landscape. It doesn't mean that all the problems are solved. But the reason that this moment in time is so important, it's not just about cultural change, and it's not just about the fact that our competitors are becoming, moving faster. It's the fact that there is this bank of the suite of technologies that will continue to advance, and they will increasingly converge. And when they do, they open up all kinds of other new and interesting possibilities, which my friend Steven Kotler, who was here with us today, will walk us through. And a little bit, actually, won't walk us through, but he'll give us that little peek into. In the book, actually, we go through 10 of them, and we just give, short paragraphs, but we feel like they're really, really important. They are the building blocks of the future. And it's important that we understand, at least have a basic working knowledge of what they are, from artificial intelligence and spatial computing to bioengineering and robotics. And so they will have, again, a very important role in shaping what comes next. And so we need to wonder a lot more about them. I encourage every single student right now to take a basic course in artificial intelligence. It's just like learning to code. It's like learning to write. It's like it will become just something we need to have more facility in and more literacy in. And so we don't necessarily have to be programmers, but we have to understand what the technology can or cannot do and what some of the limitations of it are. And again, if we're trying to ward off bias, that we certainly question the way that we build things. And the only way we can do that is to wonder more about how it's currently being deployed and built. So I'm excited now to turn this over to my friend, Steven Kotler, a very prolific author and thinker around this. He's written 13 books, 9 of which have been bestsellers. Pretty amazing feat. Also been nominated for 2 Pulitzer Prizes. And so, is one of these people who helps make sense of the world around us. But I think what's even more impressive about Steven is that he's been very, very curious. He wonders a lot about human performance and has become a leading authority on human performance. He is executive director for the Flow Research Collective, all about, again, being in the neurology of flow and learning and being at peak performance. He has written 2 books that that right now that I talk a lot about, which is The Future is Faster Than You Think, with a person named with a person named Peter Diamandis, who co-founded Singularity University and the X Prize. In his conversation, we'll also mention Ray Kurzweil, who was the other co-founder of the Singularity University and lists his employer as Google, but is just a prolific thinker who has been prognosticating, if you will, about the role that technologies will have, and been pretty accurate about the role that the internet would play in our lives and others. So this is the work that Steven delves into and gives us, I think, some perspective on. So with that, I'll just let Steven chat for a moment, and then we'll come back and understand what this all means for us.
The purpose of the book is to shift the way people think, right? The mindset part. Like, I can go in and talk about these technologies. We can talk about the applications. We can talk about how they're going to change all kinds of huge things on the planet in the next 5 years, in the next 50 years, and people just keep resisting it.
Nancy, the point you're trying to make and you want me to talk about is we wrote The Future is Faster Than You Think because we wrote 2 other books on this topic. Abundance was about individual lines of exponential technology and how they were accelerating. Bold was, oh, wow, entrepreneurs who want to take advantage of this. How do we do this? How do we build companies around these ideas? Right. And 2 questions were raised. One, what about legacy organizations? How did they adapt to change? Right. And that was part of what we were trying to address in The Future is Faster Than You Think. And in looking at that question, because we went industry by industry, the 11 biggest industries on earth, tried to figure out what was going to happen over the next decade, we realized that none of those institutions, none of them would be the same. Like, they'd all be so radically changed. There was no other way to do that. And one way to think about that level of radical change, and one way to think about what organizations need to be prepared for, Ray Kurzweil, who, as we know, is the master of these numbers, when he prognosticated out on all the exponential growth that we're going to see in the 21st century, he believes we're going to have 10,000 years or 20,000 years of technological change before the end of the decade, before the end of the 21st century. So that, in real world context, means we're going birth of agricultural to the Industrial Revolution twice in the next 80 years. What that means for the next 10 is 100 years of technological change. So think about 1921, right? Think about the companies that are built to serve 1921, and then fast forward to 2021, and that's where we're going to end up, and let's say raise off by 50%. Right? It still doesn't change, right? So it's still a massive amount of preparedness. And Futurist Faster was a way of saying, hey, these formerly independent lines of exponentials are converging. And when they converge, you get a whole that's much greater than the sum of its parts effect, which is why you get 100 years of change packed into 10 years. That's the why underneath it. And if you understand, first of all, how exponentials develop, and if you understand the patterns with which they converge, you start to be able to see into the future, and you start to be able to kind of navigate for that future. So 5 years ago, when I was talking to NBC, I said, look, what you don't understand is right now, you think entertainment is a market and healthcare is a market. You don't understand that they're now the same market. And 10 to 15 years from now, do I play a video game or go to a movie, or do I play a video game or movie that is going to make me healthier, happier, smarter, whatever? Mash up, converging exponentials lead to converging markets, and that's what we're seeing over and over and over again. It appears that we need 3 levels of goals to properly drive the system, with one being what Peter and I talked about in bold, a massively transformative purpose at the top of the arc, which is why, for example, when Salim Ismail went out and studied the 100 fastest growing companies in the world and was looking for commonalities, one of the only ones was they all had massively transformative purposes at the top. And it's because it takes advantage of our inherent biology. And on that case, we're like, oh, look, the biology of individuals, it transfers to organizations. We see it we saw it in the lab. We saw it in the literature. Now we're seeing it in the real world, and we can measure it. So we're starting to get a handle on this. A big sweeping, like Art Impossible, is literally the full suite of individual peak performance, because we now understand all the different parts and how they work together. I think we're at the front end of that revolution.
Part that I'm really curious, and then you have it as one of your big 5 migrations, right? But it's this high collaborative capacity that we will have at some point as a society to be able to build and change and exchange information with much more complexity, the same way that you do see in the insect kingdom, or you do see in nature in other ways. So doesn't nature become sort of the pattern for what we're headed to?
Let me hit on another piece. This is part of the puzzle I think you're trying to wrap your head around, and it's part of the puzzle I'm trying to wrap my head around. And we know the peak performance, the neurobiology, we know how that works, but at scale, complicated, difficult, weird puzzles, and very much based on organizational personality, right? Which is another really interesting mystery, because your personality is not exactly your brand standards, right? It's not actually what you're showing to the world. Some of it is, how do we build learning cultures, right? How do we build learning cultures that function from the inside out? We know how to build skunkworks. Those work fantastically. We know they're designed around high flow principles, so we know that works. We also know there's small, tighter containers, and that everybody who's tried to do sort of skunkworks at scale has run into problems, right? One of which is you generate so much excitement in your employees. When you don't capture their value, they feel demotivated.
I picked up The Art of the Impossible this morning, and I was flipping. I just went through like a place in the book, right, where you talk about long haul creativity, and about the fact that there's a point in almost every project where you go and like bang your head on, you bang the floor and you cry and you sob and you think, oh my God, what the hell am I doing here? Right. And then I think that is not something that's in the creative world. People are actually more comfortable with that experience because they realize it's not life threatening. It's just part of the process. In the business world, people are not at all.
Oh, not at all comfortable. And the funny thing about that process, I didn't spend all the time because the book was very long at that point. So I couldn't break down the neuroscience of long haul creativity, because it's different. But what that literally is just, we have a limited working memory. When you're trying to solve a difficult problem, our working memory can hold 4 concepts. If you're really well trained, 5. Right? And if you're trying to solve a book or a business puzzle, right, when you're dealing with 5 verticals and how do they integrate and something like that, right? Like literally by design, you are going to overwhelm working memory. Frustration is designed, like you need a certain level of frustration for the brain to go, oh, I got to pass this over to my subconscious so it can, right, internalizes. This is how we adapt and learn. But without that initial energy in the system, the brain doesn't decide it's important enough to problem solve for you. So that frustration is, like, we teach this to people all the time individually, that frustration in peak performance work is a sign that you're moving in the right direction. It's also an organizational lesson, of course.
But I think if you're going to leave people with one bit of encouraging advice as we navigate to this future, right? What is, do you think, the biggest misunderstanding that people have, or the biggest thing that would be helpful for them to know?
So I think there's two things. One's really quick, and it's the point that Peter makes a lot off of faster, and I think the other one dovetails right off of it. Is, again, the intersection of both of the books. But the faster point is there is more opportunity over the next 10 years than we've seen ever before, right? The point we make over and over is every time a technology goes exponential, there's internet-sized opportunity sitting inside. So if we open with this conversation with there are 14 exponentials that we can see, and if you parse the list slightly differently, you can see 20 of them or so, which is to say there are 20 internet-sized revolutions waiting to happen very soon. So that's the opportunity side. The flip side, which I think is equally optimistic, is this is what's at the heart of Art Impossible. Jokingly, people said, "Why did you write this book?" And I said, honestly, I wrote this book because over past 20, 30 years, I've gotten to meet the most extraordinary people in the history of the world. But every story that's in the book, there's 100 people that were almost in the book if they could just get out of their own way. They just could not trip over their own biology. I wrote this book because I got really tired of watching people trip over themselves, because the world, I know how to do this. I can do peak performance. That's what I am great at. I don't know how to solve water scarcity in Africa, right? Somebody else does, though, and I can help them do that. And that's really why I wrote the book, because we now know enough that we can train up the human organism to keep pace with the technology.
Well, I'm just excited that I got one out. Sunshine. We'll see if I ever get any more, but it feels good to at least get, an semblance of this thinking. And again, not because I think it's all right or all baked, but because at least it's a good place for us to start these conversations and continue to have them. So thank you.
Part of what, again, that makes it so extraordinary in this moment that we're in. But the question is, how do we get from here to there? And part of it is, again, what I forgot to say about Steven Kotler is he is a leading authority on peak performance. He's the executive director of the Flow research project or research collective, which is all about getting into flow states and being able to optimize individual performance. But the question becomes, how do we do that on a broader scale? And he and I had a longer conversation about how do you scale innovation and where you run into some of the roadblocks around that. But I think his learning around all the research around a massive transformative purpose, it's part of what has built Singularity's real mission around this, is how do you solve a problem for 1 billion people. We'll be talking about that more on Friday when we talk about what it means to be audacious and the drive of a massively transformative purpose. Tomorrow you hear John Hagel talk about an aspirational narrative and why we need those in order to be able to, again, pull ourselves forward. But I think the question again becomes, how does the individual, and I would argue the organization, keep pace with this level of technology? And I think his counsel that frustration is actually a good thing. I kept saying that to myself yesterday when we kept running into these various tech hurdles. I'm like, frustration's good. Frustration's good. We're learning something new. But it is hard. Individually, we don't always feel really great about that. And one of the conversations that Doug and I also had was around imposter syndrome and how people feel as though they just never know enough. And in this world where things are kind of coming at us so quickly and such volumes, we don't know enough. And we have to be really comfortable learning and leading simultaneously instead of feeling like we have to have all the answers sorted out before we can go and apply it over here. We just don't get the luxury of doing that anymore. And it's also about preparing our kids for that. My concern is that we've got them in school systems right now with really tight rubrics that show them there's a right answer. And they're heading into a world where that will become, honestly, less and less available to them. And how will they handle that? And we're seeing all kinds of rates of how frustration, when it's internalized, can turn into things like depression. So how do we ensure that we actually are really holding each other well as we navigate into something that I think can be so challenging in so many ways. So one of the things that this chapter closes with is a conversation, what I call the riff map. One of the reasons I realized that I think we resist new information is partly because it challenges the way we've always been doing things, and we think that that's scary. But it's also because we don't want to know what to do with the information. We don't know how to activate it. We get concerned that should it be positive or should it be negative? We've got conflicting narratives in our heads, and we can't make sense of these paradoxes. So how do we navigate our way through that? And so all I did was sort of rebrand the SWOT analysis into something that is more external. And then I describe it as, what am I relieved by, inspired by, frustrated by, and fearful of? It's super simple. But when you go through and you actually do an inventory, an audit of those things that you're relieved by and inspired by, it actually gives you a tremendous amount of hope. It makes you realize that this thing is working in for us, not just against us. And the things that we're frustrated by or even frightened by are things that we can go and build solutions for or work with others to support what they're doing. We've done it a lot with teams. We've been doing it a lot recently, actually. And what we find when you do it with teams is two things happen. One is that you do it individually, then you do it collectively with 4 or 5 people, and you have to try and put these things on a joint map. And what you find is we're often biased to the bottom versus the top. We usually don't give enough credit to the things that we're relieved by or inspired by. I'm relieved by the fact that there is so much knowledge available in the world right now that I could literally log on and for free learn almost anything that I want to learn and or connect with almost anybody on the planet who has a similar curiosity that I have. That is an extraordinary thing, right? I love that I'm relieved by the fact that we're starting to think about things in a more systemic way and not just in an interventionist way. We're starting to have more of those conversations. Those are things I'm really relieved by. I'm inspired by the technologies that will allow us to solve these complex problems. One of the things that Matthew is a real champion for and a builder of is the distributed web and what that will allow for in terms, again, of our ability to create and exchange value very differently in the not so far future. So I get inspired by that, right? But the things that we are frustrated by and fearful of, what you find again is something that I might be inspired by is the thing that you're frightened by, or vice versa. And the empathy that comes from that, the compassion that comes from that, and seeing that, oh, I can see that 3D printing a house for $7,000 is massively transformative in terms of being able to provide dignified housing for people and potentially even universal basic housing, as radical a thought. What if we could do that, right? But someone who's in the sheetrock business probably finds that a very scary thing. So those are incumbent businesses who haven't made that transformation yet, do resist. And so I think, again, understanding why is helpful. And the last thing I will say about the riff map is the things that, again, that we are frustrated by or frightened by, they're great springboards to go create. So things that I have been frustrated by is, again, the resistance to change, the belief that we don't have the capacities to be able to navigate our way through. So we wrote a book. I'm really frustrated by the fact that women are so underrepresented in the historic conversation around innovation and the current. We're not building it. We're reducing our numbers that are in comp sci. We're a fraction of the women that are in, or people that are building artificial intelligence solutions. We are, of the 560 companies that have gone public recently, 3 were founded by a woman. So we're not also participating in the value creation of what is happening as a result. So because of all this, we created the Femme Futurist Society last year in order to be able to make more visible the voices and the perspectives of women that are shaping the future, both for each other and hopefully to inspire other women to step into that, right? So frustration can be this amazingly galvanizing force. And the things that I'm frightened by, AI bias, right up there, right? Emotional well-being, particularly of youth, one of the things I'm most concerned by. Growing inequity, huge issue that I think we need to wrap our heads around. So there are really some significant things that are calling to our attention, but there are solutions out there, or there are ways that we can think about how to redesign things to get to those solutions. So wonder is not just about the technologies, it's about the applications. It's about the way that they can shift things in a way that I think can create a much, again, stronger, more vibrant, thriving future for everyone, which I think is the goal that hopefully that we are working toward and now being invited to. So on the half hour, I will say that's kind of the wonder versus resist take on things. But again, it's only one of the capacities, right? Wonder was one piece of the puzzle. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about really how we build a better sense of how to navigate terrain that we've never been through before.